Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to another episode of Darker Than Blue here on WPFW 89.3 FM in the Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia area. Darker Than Blue. Here we are, your number one source for socialism, struggle, and soul on WPFW, the number one source where we are changing the world one broadcast at a time. And we certainly try to do that here on Darker Than Blue. I am your host, Jackie Lukman. Thank you so much for joining me for another Friday at 5 p.m. session on what is going on in these very dark times where I know it leaves many of us very blue, but I try really hard to just give you the facts about what's really going on because we are very concerned about things that we know a little bit about. We hear a little bit about some of these things in the corporate media that remember every media outlet, every media infrastructure, every media anything, whether it is print, cable, local news, if it's radio, if it's magazines, movies, television shows, all of those things. I dare say I'm beginning to wonder about stage plays now. All media in this country is owned and controlled by six multinational corporations that all contribute heavily to this government. So all of the information you get on corporate media outlets, it doesn't matter what the outlet is, doesn't matter if it's Fox News or MSNBC or CNN, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anymore if it's on NPR, if it's if it's corporate owned, it is controlled information. And what you're getting are US government, State Department, pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist, pro-oppression talking points. But that is not so here on WPFW, listener supported radio. That is very important, that designation of listener supported radio, because what that means is that not only do you get to listen to all of your shows that you love on this station without commercial breaks, without ads, without corporate sponsorships, you actually control the content. We talk about what you want to hear. And if at any point you don't like what we are saying here, you do have a couple of choices. You cannot listen. It's okay if you don't like what I say here on Darker Than Blue. There are so many other incredible shows that do focus on organizing and political analysis that you can choose from. So you have a selection that covers the spectrum of political thought here on WPFW. Where else do you get that? When you watch CNN, when you watch MSNBC, when you watch Fox News, when you listen to the local corporate owned radio stations, you get one perspective. And that is always the perspective of the capitalists, of the corporatists, of the Republicans and the Democrats, of the people who control this capitalist, imperialist, oppressive government and system. But here on WPFW, you get a lot more than that. You get a gamut of political and social thought. And here on Darker Than Blue, you are going to get the anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, pan-African, anti-patriarchal, anti-settler colonial, anti-Zionist truth. So let's talk about a little bit of that truth today. Something that I found very interesting, because, I don't talk about anything on this show that I don't find interesting. But I have been really fascinated by the conversation around this so-called nonprofit killer bill. It is officially called the Stop Terror Financing and Tax Penalties on American Hostages Act. The number of the bill is HR House Resolution 9495. So I'm going to say it again so you can write that down, so you can go to, what is it, congress.gov, I believe, and look up this legislation yourself and read what's in it so you know what's going on. So don't believe me just because you're hearing me say it. I'm going to give you the information so that you can go look this up yourself. So it is HR 9495. The official title of the bill is the Stop Terror Financing and Tax Penalties on American Hostages Act. And this is a big deal because this bill, according to The Intercept, and this is an article that was written by Noah Horowitz on November 21st of this year, just a few days ago. And his article is entitled Democratic Support for the Bill. Oh, I'm sorry. The title of his article is The House Just Blessed Trump's Authoritarian Playbook by Passing Nonprofit Killer Bill. But was this bill a part of Trump's authoritarian playbook? Really? And let me explain to you why. So, Mr. Horowitz points out in this article, the first thing he says is this bill would give President-elect Donald Trump broad powers to target his political foes, and it has passed a major hurdle toward becoming law because it was just passed in the House of Representatives, one of the two chambers in which legislation must pass in order for it to become law. So it's cleared the first hurdle. It has passed the House in a 219 to 184 vote, largely along party lines, but 15 Democrats voted for the bill along with the Republican majority. Now, this bill, HR 9495, would empower the Treasury Secretary to unilaterally declare that any nonprofit is a terrorist supporting organization, and they would have the power to revoke that nonprofit's tax exempt status, effectively killing the nonprofit group. Critics say the proposal would give presidential administrations a tool to crack down on organizations for political ends. Obviously, people are very, very afraid, excuse me, of what President-elect Donald Trump would do with this legislation. But do y'all realize that Trump is not actually president yet? That is why he is still called president-elect. He is not actually officially president yet. He is not officially doing anything as president yet. I know people are freaking out about his potential cabinet appointments, and yes, his cabinet appointments are wackadoodle crazy and some really weird, just bizarre, very worrying for many reasons. But I mean, are these particular people what's worrying people, or the cabinet positions? Because I don't know if you paid any attention over the past 4 years, but the so-called more decent people in the Biden-Harris administration have gone along with the repression of freedom of speech, the repression of freedom of association, the repression of freedom to protest and redress your government. The Democratic Party has been very effective in repressing people's rights along those regards. So I'm not sure why people are afraid that Trump is going to use this legislation for purposes that the Democrats were already I let me just go on and explain, because I'm trying to make logic out of something that is illogical, and I just can't. So let's talk a little bit more about this. Of course, the Democrats who now have come out in opposition to this bill, and I'll explain that in a minute. Representative Lloyd Doggett, a Democrat of Texas, who and I will give him credit. I think he has been opposed to the bill from the very beginning. He says, and he's one of the few Democrats who have been opposed to the bill from the very beginning. Doggett says that authoritarianism is not born overnight. It creeps in. A tyrant tightens his grip, not just by seizing power, but when he demands new powers and when those who can stop him willingly cede and bend to his, to his will. Republicans were quick to highlight what they described as flip-flopping by Democrats who previously supported the bill, chalking the change up to, quote, Trump derangement syndrome, end quote. Representative Jason Smith, a Republican from Missouri, Mr. Horowitz reports in his article, said that, quote, the only thing that has changed for the majority of the people changing their votes, that's Democrats, over there is that Donald Trump will be president. That's what Representative Jason Smith, Republican of Missouri, said. And he went on to say, that is very unfortunate. Well, I'm going to do a little bit better than Representative Smith did. And I'm just going to say that's very hypocritical. That's very full of hypocrisy, but that's very typical Democrat. Because I say to you all the time, and many of us anti-imperialist organizers say to you all of the time, that and thank you to the late Glenn Ford, who I had the pleasure and the honor to meet and to spend a little bit of time with, not a whole lot, but enough for me to know that he was brilliant, special, and prescient. Because it was Glenn Ford who I believe coined the phrase the Black Misleadership class. And Glenn also said of the Democrats that they are the more effective evil. It's not that they are lesser evil, they are the more effective evil. So we say very frequently, we anti-imperialist organizers say very frequently that it's not that Democrats are better than Republicans. They are better at marketing their authoritarianism than Republicans. Oh, I know we're getting into some very uncomfortable language when we're talking about Democrats right now because people believe that only Republicans are authoritarian. But if that's true, why did 52 Democrats support this bill when it was initially introduced earlier this year, long before the election? The article from The Intercept says a previous bill with a provision, with a separate provision, was initially introduced in November 2023. Oh, this was a separate bill that was introduced with this bill's language in it as a provision, and that was introduced in 2023, last year, in the early days of Israel's US funded devastation of Gaza. I still don't like the framing of what is going on in Gaza that includes words that are not genocide, but okay. With the ostensible goal of blocking US-based nonprofits from supporting terrorist groups like Hamas. Representative Claudia Tenney, a Republican of New York, and other supporters of the bill touted it as a tool to crack down on pro-Palestine groups they claim exploit tax laws to bolster Hamas and fuel anti-Semitism. She said, my bill is straightforward. Tax-exempt nonprofits should not fund terrorist groups, end quote. Tenney, who has extreme pro-Israel views, extend to denying the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories. That's what she said last week. She doesn't believe there is an occupation. She believes that land is Israel. She believes that the Palestinians are all Hamas and they're all terrorists, even the babies. So of course she would say that. Of course, they don't see people's resistance to oppression, to occupation, to ethnic cleansing, to apartheid, to genocide as legitimate. So as far as she's concerned, and as far as people who support this bill are concerned, the people resisting their oppression are terrorists, not the people who are doing the oppressing that the United States government is giving money and weapons to help them carry out the oppression, the apartheid, the ethnic cleansing, the land theft, and the genocide. No, the people who are opposing all of those things being done to him, to them, and fighting for their lives, their land, their future, their freedom, their very existence, those people are terrorists to the folks who support this bill. Not just Republicans, but initially 52 Democrats supported this bill. When it was introduced, I think reintroduced as a standalone bill, I think around April of earlier this year, when it was taken out of this other bill that we just talked about, and it was introduced as a standalone bill in April. That was long before the election. So people were thinking that the Democrats would win the White House, because weren't they awful cocky throughout this whole election, doing the things that they did, carrying out a coup in their own party, because they were pretty sure that Biden could not win against Trump. So they put all their Kamala in one basket. and they had her ran that unfortunately horrific campaign that she ran devoid of any kind of substance for the working class and the poor, that we needed to hear from her in order to give people a reason to vote for her. But they didn't. So what happened happened. And there's the whole thing of the Democrats facilitating a genocide that people did not want to be a party to. And what happened happened. And there are a whole other, and we talked about that and all that kind of stuff. Okay, good. So this bill has been sitting, well, it has been sitting. They actually voted on it in April or in May or something like that. And 52 Democrats voted for it. And this is interesting because this bill didn't need to be introduced at all. Why? Because it is already illegal for nonprofits or for anybody else in the United States to provide material support to what this government designates as terrorist groups. And honestly, anybody that the United States government calls a terrorist, I am automatically pulling back and saying, oh yeah, what they do? Why? Why does the US government consider them terrorists? Who are they fighting against? And 9.5 times out of 10, we find out that the people that the US government are calling terrorists are actually fighting against the brutal, repressive interference of the US government in their government and in their country's affairs. Right? But this bill didn't need to exist because there is already a law on the books that makes it illegal for nonprofits or individual people to provide material support to so-called terrorist groups. And the federal government has been enforcing it, including through prosecutions and sanctions. This new bill, introduced by this crazy Zionist Tenney woman who doesn't believe that the occupation is real, doesn't believe that apartheid is real, doesn't believe this is a genocide, doesn't have a problem with ethnic cleansing. Her bill would sidestep any due process. But let's be clear. The US government doesn't really have to provide any evidence to prove that their designation of any organization or any person is a terrorist entity. They didn't have to prove that Samidoun was a terrorist organization, or that they supported Hamas, or that they raised money for Hamas, which is what they accused Samidoun of doing. They didn't provide any evidence for that, and that happened 2 months ago under the Biden-Harris administration. That happened 2 months ago. I think it was 2 months ago, before the election, when the Democrats, do you understand what I'm saying? I really hope you do. Because the fact that this bill, that people are making a big deal about this bill, and it's terrible, the fact that this woman decided that she needed to introduce another or write another piece of legislation that would give the Treasury Department power to sanction and prosecute nonprofit organizations for allegedly raising money to fund terrorist organizations. That already happens. That is already done. But allegedly the law that exists, they say, in the article, Mr. Horowitz says that the law that exists, um, does include some due process elements, but we didn't see any due process with the designation of Samidoun as aiding a terrorist entity, Hamas. But this particular bill, this new bill that's been introduced, HR 9495, doesn't have any due process language in it, and it is very vague on specifics. And Horowitz says in this article that critics fear that even if a group were to successfully appeal their designation, few nonprofit organizations would survive the legal costs and the black mark on their reputation, which is the point of this legislation, this new bill, and the existing. And it's not really that they know they're lying. The US government knows that it's lying when it designates whole countries like Cuba as state sponsors of terror, when they designate people's resistance groups like Hamas or Hezbollah as terrorist groups without giving any kind of context as to why these groups exist and what they are and have been fighting against and what they're fighting for. The government doesn't have to say or explain any of that. The government doesn't have the burden of proof here. Not for us. I think they have in the original bill like some boilerplate, uh, basically worthless language that is satisfies their legal requirements for a burden of proof. Like, okay, you have to have investigated something. But I don't think there is anything in that legislation that makes anything they have uncovered or anything they have used to make their determination about nonprofits and who they raise money for. They are under no obligation to give that information to us. So they don't. They just tell us. The Department of the Treasury, the Department of Justice, the State Department, they just release these press releases where they say after so and so investigation, the Department of the Treasury has determined that Samidoun raises money and gives it to Hamas. That there's no documentation, nothing provided to support that. And the only thing different about this piece of legislation that has been introduced is that thin veneer of due process, that's not even in here. The interesting thing, aside from the 52 Democrats who originally voted for this legislation, that this pro-Zionist, genocide denying, anti-Semite, because Palestinians are a Semitic people, this Tenney person, Democrats voted for this piece of legislation that a far right wing Republican wrote to destroy, to more easily destroy, to more quickly destroy, to destroy without any hesitation or any roadblocks, nonprofits and individuals that they don't like because they are providing solidarity and material support to groups of people in other countries that they don't like. And who are the people in other countries that this government doesn't like? The people who are fighting against US imperialism. That's what this bill is. It is the punishment. It's another form of punishment for international anti-imperialist solidarity. And 52 Democrats voted for it when they thought it was going to be used by the Harris-Walz administration. As soon as Trump won the election, then only 15 Democrats support the bill. Now, all of those other Democrats decided now that Trump is going to be the one to use this legislation that, remember, they were fine with passing just a few weeks ago, a few months ago. They were fine with Harris using this legislation to destroy nonprofits and individuals who provide material support to anti-imperialist struggles around the world. They were happy with giving this legislation to Harris Waltz, but giving it to Trump was a bridge too far. That what? Is Trump going to do anything worse with this legislation than Harris Waltz was going to do? Because the legislation lets you just accuse an organization, a nonprofit, of funding a terrorist organization, taking away their nonprofit status, and destroying the organization. The bill allows anybody who is in power to do that. And the bill doesn't even have to exist because the US government can already do that, and it already has on multiple occasions. And by US government, I do mean the Democratic administrations also. Because, like I said, a previous version of the bill was a broad bipartisan effort. There's that word again, bipartisan, that I keep telling you, you need to be very, very wary of. Because bipartisanship always means the Democrats will sell the people out to make a deal with the Republicans so both of them can get what they want and we get nothing. All right. So this bill just a few months ago was a bipartisan effort passed with 382 votes to 11 in the House in April. Only 11 people opposed this bill when it was first introduced in April. Many Democrats now have withdrawn their support, citing a fear that the incoming Trump administration could weaponize the bill. I was not making that up. I told you the Democrats were like, oh, this is a great piece of legislation for our girl Kamala Harris to have. And as soon as Donald Trump won the election, then it became, oh, he can't have this. He can't have this. He's going to do terrible things with it. Harris was going to do terrible things with it because this bill exists only to do terrible things to nonprofits and individuals. That is how the bill is written. That is what it exists to do. But that is what the law always has been in this country in regard to this issue. And I cannot stress this enough. Democrats who supported the bill in the beginning are responding to Trump being the one to use it. They were fine with the language in the bill, even the lack of due process in the original bill in April. It was never there, and they voted for it anyway. And to me, this is an example of the Democrats' complicity in passing repressive, anti-democratic legislation that targets people in solidarity with anti-imperialist groups in other countries. This government calls every group that forms to oppose the oppression and violence that the US backs in other countries terrorists. We know this, right? But the real terrorists are the US government, its proxies like Israel and Ukraine, and the federal agencies like the FBI and the Treasury Department that all take part and have their specific roles in the denial of the alleged freedom of speech and of association that we alleged citizens supposedly have. But I say alleged because if we had those freedoms, I would not be having this conversation about this legislation with you today. This bill punishes, I think I have to add, this bill punishes the very people the US government is supporting the oppression of in other countries in the first place by destroying the organizations that collect funds to provide aid to those oppressed people. So not only has the US government supported genocide in Gaza and in Lebanon, and the Zionist apartheid entity has gotten their handed to them in Lebanon, so they had to go back to that old ceasefire gambit. Please stop kicking our behinds. We will leave. We will get out of your country for now. yeah, by sending weapons and the regular $3 billion in financial. How much is it? 300 billion? It's way too many billions. I can't remember. It's way too many billions of our tax dollars that this government, the US government, sends to Israel in financial support every single year. But the same government and the same people who run it go farther in denying humanitarian aid to the people that our tax dollars are being used to oppress and murder. Our tax dollars pay for the Zionists' free health care, right? While this government tells us that universal health care for us is too expensive to even think about, so we better stop asking for it. And the fact that people are not enraged about this, particularly since now our tax dollars are not just funding free health care for Zionists in Israel, now our tax dollars are funding genocide. How are you not enraged? And then there's this legislation that is just, it's wild. Among the Democrats voting against the bill last week was Representative Dina Titus, a Democrat of Nevada, who was the co-sponsor of the bill. I'm not making this up. I'm not this creative. I don't like comedies. I am goofy. And I have a really weird, wicked, and dark sense of humor, but I cannot make this kind of stuff up. I'm not that duplicitous. Horowitz says in his article in The Intercept, in a statement from Representative Titus, she said that her support for the bill had been solely based on the hostage tax relief provision and accused her GOP colleagues of adding the nonprofit provision that could be abused by a future administration. Huh? So she's going to act like she didn't know that language to strip the tax exempt status from nonprofit. She's going to act like she didn't know that was in there. Man, come on. Whew, I can't dwell on that anymore because there's a cuss word very close to coming out, and FEC laws can't, yeah. And it is time for a quick station break. Our fantastic producer has a promo that is going to give you some information that you need to know about, dear listeners, here in WPFW land. And I'll have a little something extra for you on the back end. What we got? Oh, is our producer inside? Do we have a promo? All right. If we don't have a promo, then I am going to announce Friday, December 6th, 2024 at 6 p.m. The All African People's Revolutionary Problem, AAP problem, All African People's Revolutionary Party. Well, they are a problem for the imperialists, and that's a fantastic thing.
Yeah, sorry, I pressed the button, but it didn't play.
No problem. The UNIA ACL Division, Pan-African Community Action, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, the Black Alliance for Peace DC, and Positive Productions Incorporated presents to you a film and discussion remembering Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. That's on Friday, December 6, 2024 at 6 p.m. The film is called Sobukwe, A Great Soul, and the screening and discussion will be held at Sankofa Video Books and Cafe, 2714 Georgia Avenue Northwest in Washington, D.C. And you can register at Sobukwe at 100. That is SOBUKWEAT, the numbers 100.eventbrite.com. Again, register at Sobukwe at 100.eventbrite.com. Thanks so much. Please go to that site and get all of the information about that event that you need. All right, so let's get back to this wild thing about this bill. Back in the article, Horowitz writes, despite a majority of Democrats coming out against the bill in last week's vote, the bill still received the support of 52 Democrats on November 12th. That was a week after the election when they knew that Trump was going to be president. And they were still like, yep, still want the repression. Then on Thursday, that number dwindled to 15 as Democrats flipped in opposition, including Representatives Angie Craig of Minnesota, Gabe Vasquez of New Mexico, both of whom cited Trump's increasingly unhinged cabinet selections in their statements prior to the vote. I strongly oppose any actions that support foreign terrorist organizations, Craig said Wednesday on X. However, over the past several days, as the president-elect has rolled out his cabinet nominees, I've become increasingly concerned that H.R. 9495 would be used inappropriately by the incoming administration. What was the appropriate way to use a piece of legislation that exists to destroy organizations that provide humanitarian aid to victims of US-backed apartheid, occupation, and genocide? This is the nature of Democratic Party delusion. They will tell people that they will use dangerous legislation in a more responsible way than Republicans would. Same legislation. The legislation itself is repressive. It is a violation of the rights to a freedom of association. It's a violation of the right to international solidarity. It's all kind of messed up stuff. It is undemocratic. It is repressive. It is punitive. But Democrats who were co-sponsors of the bill and who voted for the bill in huge numbers in the House were fine with the same legislation being used by Harris and Walz. And if you don't think that Harris and Walz would have used this legislation to destroy nonprofit organizations because of who they are in solidarity with, then you really weren't paying attention to what the Democrats did over the past 4 years, which included the designation of, like I said at the beginning of the show, the Samidoun Solidarity Network, which provides support to Palestinian political prisoners. The Palestinian people who are arbitrarily locked up, rounded up by the Israeli occupation forces, falsely imprisoning them, torturing them, putting them in solitary confinement, assaulting them, breaking bones, raping men, women, and children, keeping people locked up in something called administrative confinement that is like this bizarre kind of apartheid purgatory that they set up so that they're not actually in prison where they have to be treated under certain alleged certain standards, which they really don't. But they're not free. So they're in this a black hole of torture that the Israeli government has set up, especially for Palestinians. And the Palestinians don't have to have done anything wrong. Because a little bit later on, y'all on Black Liberation Media, we're going to talk about an aspect of fascism that I really think we need to understand. And then next week, we're going to talk about that, you and I, here on Darker Than Blue, because we got to have a conversation about fascism, as annoying as it is, because people believe they know what fascism is, and they don't understand that even the experts do not agree on what fascism really completely encompasses. So none of us can really say that all of this thing is or is not fascism, but we can all point to aspects of fascism that do exist in this society, which I argue does make the society a fascist society. But look, we got to have that conversation. But this legislation, doesn't it seem kind of fascisty to you? The fact that the government can just decide, because they don't like who you are raising money for, that they can determine that those people are terrorists, and they can decide that you don't get to do your life's work anymore in providing support to these people who are being oppressed. Isn't it That's bad. And I'm okay. It might not be full grown fascism, because this is what people say all the time. Well, that's not full blown fascism. Okay, well, how come when Trump becomes president, everything he does and says is full blown fascism? But nothing that the Democrats have done that has been exactly the same as what Trump did in his first administration. And a lot of it has been exactly the same or worse than what previous Republicans have done. How come nothing the Democrats ever do is considered fascist, but everything Trump does is fascist? Come on, we've got to do better than this. Okay, even if we're not exactly sure about everything about what fascism is, we can. I think we need to start being honest that both the Democrats and the Republicans have always displayed the same fascistic tendencies in different ways. But when we talk about a little bit later on, I think you are going to see that, yeah, you've been living under some type of or some iteration or some aspects of fascism in this country all your little lives, regardless of whether you think this is full blown fascism or not. Okay, but so this piece of legislation is giving me those fascist vibes, especially in a country in which, like we said earlier, all of the media is controlled by 6 multinational corporations that are also deeply, deeply implicated in controlling, or at least, I know controlling is a big old word for some people that's doing a lot of work, but having a lot of influence on the government. So these media outlets do not tell you anything this government does not want you to know. That is just, and everything they want you to believe, how they want you to think about certain things, what they want you to think about certain things. That is what the media tells you, because that's their role. Control of the media, or I'm sorry, government control of the media. That's an element of fascism. And if you don't understand that corporations in this country do have an undue, outsized level of influence on this government, I would argue that we do live in a kleptocracy, or a corporatocracy, if you want to call it that, where the corporations and the rich do control the government. I that's an element of fascism. Whether you think it's full blown fascism or not, it is an element of it. So the people um involved in voting for this bill have been the Democrats have been just really weird. They spent all this time talking about how people had to vote for them to save the country from full-blown fascism of Donald Trump. He's going to usher in full-blown fascism. I cannot tell you how many people, and I mean left, so-called organizers on the left too. Trump is going to usher in full-blown fascism. What was it when the FBI raided the Uhuru property and put the Uhuru 3 on trial on some bogus charges of conspiring to be agents of Russia? What was that? Because if it was fascism or elements of fascism, when the government did the same thing to the IWW, to labor organizations between World War I and World War II, if we understand the government repression of anti-imperialist, anti-war labor organizing that was partial to socialism and communism, and that was becoming a representation of class collaboration, the good kind, where the working class was able to convince some other folks to commit class suicide in everybody's interest. And it was becoming a multiracial movement, the repression of those organizations, the destruction of those organizations, the accusations that they were agents of Russia. Yeah, after World War I and World War II, the same arguments that you're hearing today about activists and organizers conspiring to be agents of Russia, this is the same thing this government did after World War I and World War II, because people opposed the US government getting involved in those wars, especially World War I. So if we understand the illegal raids and the false imprisonments and the blacklisting and the denial of work opportunities, the deportations, the destruction of organizations, the seizing of buildings and assets of organizations that this government did in the past, decades ago, and that they are continuing to do, if we understand that is an element of fascism, why is it that the Democrats doing the same thing, not an element of fascism? But people are terrified that Trump is going to use this legislation to do the exact same thing, but that's fascism. That is intellectually lazy, y'all. That doesn't make any sense. And we can do better than that. We must do better than that, because we have to admit that this entire system exists not to ensure our equality and our human rights. The denial of the equality and the human rights of the people is the only way the rich can continue to enjoy the massive super profits that they do. They're not making any new products for more people to buy. They're not expanding any markets. Nothing is made in the United States that the entire world wants to buy. Not anymore. So how do these people make the incredible continuing and increasing profits that they make? Doing things like this, seizing assets of organizations and people that this government claims are aiding and abetting terrorists. They seize the assets of leaders of other countries that they don't like they just did to President Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. They took his whole plane. They took Vladimir Putin's yacht. You understand? They sanction individuals taking homes and bank accounts, and that's what this is one of the ways they enjoy their super profits. They use the law to steal from people they don't like, on top of stealing your labor, not giving you benefits or an equal share in the profits that you actually make with your labor. Yeah, they do that. And yes, they also do the coups and lawfare and interference in other countries' governments to produce destabilize countries, to destroy their governments, to carry out coups, to prop up their puppet leaders. Also, they can have access to resources that they can steal from other countries too. Yes. This is all of this that, people say very often, that they do this because they hate us. No, they do this because they're greedy. They are greedy, amoral, bloodthirsty, lack of principle having, probably mentally disturbed in the worst way possible people. I don't even like bringing hate into this discussion, because that's too easy. That, to me, talking about how much these people hate Black people, I just feel like that is such a small conversation to have when we really look at what they do and who they do it to. It's not just Black people that they are targeting with this kind of legislation. It is everybody that does not like this system of government and the repression that they export all over the world. That's what they do. It's not a hatred of any particular group of people. Yes, certain people are justified as being more deserving of that kind of treatment. That, yes, the white supremacist fake science of eugenics and all of that ridiculous race science that the Europeans came up with to justify their global conquest. Yeah, that's a part of it, but that is not the reason they do these things. They do these things because they are greedy. It is greed. It is avarice. It is the age old, you are just greedy people who like money more than you do humanity. And those people are dangerous, whether they are Republicans or Democrats. And the Democrats who co sponsored this bill and who voted for it are those people. We must be clear about that. So, one of the last things that, let's see, I do want to point out that there were some Democrats who were very honest about their continuing support for this bill. There is one person, Congressman, let's see, a spokesperson for Representative Jared Golden, a Democrat of Maine, responded for their continued support of this bill. Golden's spokesperson said, "This bill is not about who is in the White House." Congressman Golden supports the bill under President Biden and continues to support it with President-elect Trump about to take office. Now, see, that's the kind of honesty we need from Democrats. We need for them to just go ahead and admit, we don't care about your rights. We are going to do things to repress your rights because it's good for us, and we're going to support those things, and we're going to do those things whether it's a Democrat in office or whether it's a Republican in office, because we agree with your repression so that we can keep getting paid the way we get paid. We need Democrats to be honest. We're appreciative that Congressman Golden's spokesperson was at least honest in this one. But who has been silent in this? Let me tell you who we haven't heard from. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat in New York. He voted against the bill at both recent floor votes. Good for him. But has he said anything publicly about how bad the bill is? Has he spoken out against the bill? Has he come out and said, listen, we just came through a really bruising election season. We got our behinds handed to us. And you know what? We should have, because we did a really bad job at this campaign. And I am not going to not take the lessons from this campaign that the Democrats need to learn. We need to get out in front of these kinds of things and explain to the American people what we are for and what we are against. And I am telling you, as the House Minority Leader, we are against this piece of legislation because, number one, it is redundant because legislation already exists for the government to be able to do this. And number two, there has to be some kind of due process with the government being able to do this. And this bill doesn't include any. It's dangerous. Never voted for it. And we're not going to vote. You didn't hear that from him because he doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe that. I can say that because I have a conscience. Hakeem Jeffries doesn't. Hakeem Jeffries is going to protect his paycheck, just like every other Democrat in the House is going to do in regard to this bill. And all of this foolishness about not voting for this bill now that Trump has won the election, but voting for it enthusiastically, with the exception of 11 Democrats initially, when they thought that Harris was going to, oh my God, that is the height of hypocrisy. And why is that okay with you? Why is it okay with you that these people keep playing in your faces about who they are? And you know who else you haven't heard from? Chucky Schumer. It's true. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, has said nothing about the issue. And he did not respond to a request for comments from The Intercept. So, ladies and gentlemen, my friends, my dear listeners, thank you so much for hanging in and listening to the show tonight. I hope you have learned something new, particularly about this legislation, HR 9495. But I want you to understand that even if this legislation does not pass, if it does not pass in the Senate, which it has to in order for it to become law, even if it doesn't pass, the federal government of this country has the ability, the power, the authority, and it has carried out the sanctioning and the destruction of nonprofit organizations and the prosecution of individuals that this government has claimed without any evidence, without any proof whatsoever that they were somehow engaged with supporting terrorist organizations or entities. The government has been doing that. The Treasury Department has actually designated, what is it? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 organizations, many of them Muslim organizations, that they have designated or shut down altogether due to this designation of aiding and abetting or supporting terrorist organizations. This is about 9 organizations that the US government, through the Department of the Treasury, has shut down since when? 2001. So while I understand that people who don't pay that close attention to the legislation that comes out of Capitol Hill, you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know this. You wouldn't know that this is already happening and it has been happening. And the government has been doing this for a long time, for decades. And you wouldn't know that this piece of legislation was so unnecessary, but folks voted for an unnecessary, redundant piece of legislation that they knew violated rights anyway. A lot of those people were Democrats. And I'm glad you hung around to hear it from me. I hope it was helpful to you. I hope you learned something new. I hope you do something productive with it. And I hope that you stop being afraid of Trump doing things that the Democrats have been doing for at least 4 years, because it's already been happening. People have already been suffering. And I'm not exactly sure how Trump is going to make any of that worse, but I'm trying so hard to get you all to realize that no, it's not going to be worse. It's going to be the same, which means that it has always been bad. Always. For some of us. Question I have is, have you really not cared about what's been done to us until it seemed like it was about to happen to you? I think you got to ask yourself that question. But I am out of time today. Thank you so much for tuning into Darker Than Blue. Hey, y'all on Black Liberation Media, hang out. We got a little bit more discussion to have. Stay tuned for Garland Nixon and News Views, and then hang out and enjoy the beautiful sounds of WPFW's Friday night music programming. I will see you next week. Until then, peace. Be good to yourselves. Be good to each other. A luta continua. The struggle continues. But I promise you, if we keep struggling, Victoria Acerta, victory is certain. Peace. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much, everybody, for hanging out on the first, the 5 o'clock, I don't know what I'm gonna call it, Darker Than Blue, whatever. Anyway, whew, as usual, y'all, it has been some stuff going on with me. It's man, yeah. I've had a family member go through open heart surgery on Monday, and she is recovering. She is doing well in the hospital, recovering. My great uncle passed. His funeral was last Saturday. My grandmother's last surviving brother. So all of my grandmother's generation now, with the exception of his wife. Oh, excuse me, they're all gone now, and that's very sobering for me. Yeah, lots of stuff. lots of stuff going on, but this whole Trump thing, this people are losing. I'm trying not to laugh at people. I am. I'm trying not to um diminish people's fear. I'm trying to be gracious and patient, and I'm just being honest with y'all, because this is now the second iteration of this Trump derangements. And I actually don't kind of like using that phrase, because that phrase came from Marjorie Taylor Greene and I hate her. So I don't like using phrases that people I hate use. Just especially when they're stupid. So this whole terror of Trump terror thing that people just have going on. It was an annoyance in 2016, because we said then, we said then that, look, this man is not going to be he is not going to be worse than Barack Obama. He can't be. just on deportations alone. He can't be. Obama killed an American citizen in a drone strike and had a list of people that he said it was okay to kill because they allegedly were out working with terrorists in Iraq. You know, the place that the United States invaded and bombed, and they had nothing to do with that. Right. So it was in 2016, the Trump terror, and how Trump would, oh my God, it was weird. It was so weird. And I figured that after the first Trump presidency and the country wasn't destroyed, and we didn't, get sold back into slavery, because people were saying that then. People were like, oh, the Trump, he's going to reinstitute slavery. So we get more of that this time around. This second Trump presidency. We get so much more of that. And it's so much more intense, and people are so much more terrified. And I'm trying very hard to be understanding of people, because I do have to remind myself that not everybody spends every waking moment doing political analysis like I do. Which is something my therapist and my doctors are like, you need to stop doing that. You need to stop doing that, because it's kind of stressing you out, and you don't need this stress. You and your new kidney, the Beanie Boy, he does not need this stress. So, so that's why I do these shows. That's why I don't really like doing shows on like hot topics, on celebrity stuff. I don't care. I don't pay enough attention to any of that stuff to do a whole show on it. But this kind of stuff that's going, I like, what is wrong with, how do you not know? This is the thing I don't think I understand. People who do have some engagement with anti-imperialist content. You know, the repression that we suffered under the Biden administration. You know, the repression that we suffered under the Obama administration. You know that it was Obama who destroyed Occupy Wall Street. You know that. So how are y'all scared of a Trump presidency? I'm very confused about that. I'm trying very hard not to be just blatantly dismissive and clowning people about, but it's very hard, because I recognize that many of these folks are some of the same people we had these conversations with in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. And then 2020 comes around, and then we tell people, all right, now, if you're going to be running around telling people you have to vote for Biden to save you from Trump, you had better be out here when we got to organize against Biden, because we knew we were going to have to organize against Biden, because Biden's record is what it is. And where were people? Where were they? Did any more people come out into the street? Did any of those people come out? Nope. 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 Ain't nobody who said we would have an easier time organizing under Joe Biden than under Trump. None of those people showed up. I ain't see Dr. Greg Carr out in the streets. I didn't see these other people out in the streets. I did. So some of the same folks. I didn't see the Angela Rise, and I didn't see the what's his name, basketball head, Roland Martin. I ain't see him. Where was he? You can't miss him. Where was he? Between 2020 and 2024? Where was he? Other than sitting on his show, still shitting on leftists. None of these people should. And then the Democrats facilitate a genocide, and those same people are even more silent. And they got a nerve. They have the nerve to be afraid of Trump. And then they have the nerve to tell us who have been warning them about all of these people that Trump, it's your fault Trump got elected. No, it's y'all's fault. It is entirely y'all's fault. It's y'all's fault because the Green Party they didn't even get 5%. And that's something else that when I can talk about that, that's going to be so enjoyable. But I cannot talk about it right now. But the Green Party didn't even get 5%. PSL didn't get 5%, which wasn't their goal. But PSL, I think, achieved the goal that they set out. They raised the profile of socialism and electoral politics in the US again. And I think that's a great thing. So the Libertarian Party didn't even get, I don't even know but none of the third parties that the Democrats beat us over the head claiming that they were going to lose the election for Harris, none of the third parties got enough votes to threaten her. No, she lost those states because people were just like, I'm not voting for the three-ring circus reality show swaggering braggart three-ring circus clown Barker. I'm not voting for him, and I'm not voting for the genocidal cop. I'm not. If these are the choices we have for this government, that's okay. That's all right. Because it seems to me, regardless of which one of these people win, we, the American working people, are going to be screwed. And that's exactly the situation. So what a lot of people in their terror of Trump have expressed is, their fear of full-blown fascism. Aside from the fact that George Jackson told us in 1976 in Blood in My Eye that we need to settle our quarrels, come together, because fascism is already here. Fascism is already here. He said that in 1976. And here we are in 2024, and I have people arguing with me about what George Jackson said by saying, well, he wrote that when he was talking about prison. He actually was talking about US society as a whole and how aspects of fascism in US society created the fascism that is in the penal system. And in fact, the infrastructure and the mores and the rules of the penal system in the United States actually bleed into US society. So when he said fascism was already here, George Jackson was not talking about just the penal system. He wasn't just talking about prison. He was talking about American society. And I don't know what to say to people who are going to argue with me about what George Jackson said. Like I don't mind people disagreeing with me. Please, if I am wrong, please correct me, because I don't want to be running around telling people stuff that's not true. I like being right. I do. I'm just gonna admit it. I'm one of those weird people who are like, yeah, I do like being right. I do not like it when I say something that is not true, and I don't mean to it. I just don't know. So yeah, I like to know. I like to know all the things. So please correct me when I'm incorrect. But don't disagree with me just because you don't like the way I said something, or you don't like the word I used, or you don't think I know what the definition of fascism is, which is what several people have told me. And I thought that was very interesting that people would make a big deal about telling me that I don't know what the definition of fascism is, because all of the learned scholars, they don't know what the definition of fascism is. They each come up with their own observations of what they think fascism is, but none of them agree on a one unified definition of fascism. They don't. There is not one definition of fascism. It's true. So I find it very strange that people are like quick to be like, oh, I don't think you understand what fascism is. Okay, well, let's look at the elements of fascism then, because I don't understand how we can recognize that some things are the elements of fascism, is an element of fascism in the society, but then still we're gonna argue that the fascism doesn't exist in the society. I don't know how that works, but in some people's mind, that is what's happening in the US, right? And like I said, Jay, there is no one definition of fascism. There isn't. There is not. And just to be sure that I wasn't tripping, because sometimes I kind of do, I admit it. I did look up the definition of fascism, and I came up with this Google search of a bunch of different scholars, academics, who all have different definitions of fascism. All of them. They each have some elements of their definition that can be found in other people's definitions, but each definition is slightly different in some ways too. So, okay, let me show you what I mean. So, I subscribe to Britannica because I have been low key obsessed with encyclopedias ever since I was a little kid. Um, so my mom, my mama had to break down and buy a set of Encyclopedia Britannica uh, through Fingerhut because I obsessed over encyclopedias so much. But yeah, she went to the thrift store and she got one old set, and she saw how much I loved every book, front to back, cover to cover. I love encyclopedias. So she felt really bad because she had given me like an outdated a group of encyclopedias, and she bought the latest Encyclopedia Britannica set for me when I was in, oh gosh, I was in it's my first year of high school. It was yeah. That's so yeah, that I love encyclopedias. Even as I understand that this is information that the colonizers have curated, so some of it is wrong as hell. But but for this purpose, for the purposes of fascism, I think it's very interesting that as you can see, and let me little bit, let me so you don't obsess over this little dress here that I'm a little bit obsessed over. But now I'm going to try to avoid it, but it's so cute. But so here we have the Britannica pages on fascism. All right. Look at everything in this one section on fascism. They've got introduction and top questions, national fascisms, common characteristics of fascist movements, varieties of fascism. There is no one type of fascism either. Intellectual origins, social bases of fascist movements, fascism and non fascist conservatisms, collaboration and crossover, neo fascism. And then there's references and related topics. So when I go through the thing, they explain fascism in the most general terms. It's a political ideology and mass movement that dominated many parts of Central, Southern, and Eastern Europe between 1919 and 1945, and that also had adherents in Western Europe, the United States, South Africa, Japan, Latin America, and the Middle East. Gee, I wonder what those countries had in common that they all had adherence to fascism. Europeans' first fascist leader, Benito Mussolini, took the name of his party from the Latin word fascis. I hope that's how you pronounce that. I'm going to see in a minute, which refers, this is the weirdest thing, to a bundle of elm or birch rods, usually containing an axe. And when I read this, I did not understand what the hell this meant. This made no fucking sense to me until I clicked on this link and saw the picture of what they're talking about. But I'm going to do that in a minute. Let me read the rest of this. Fasces, which refer to a bunch of elm or birch rods, usually containing an axe, used as a symbol of, woo child, this right here, penal authority in Rome, in ancient Rome. Penal authority. Oh, we're going to dig into that. Although fascist parties and movements differed significantly from one another, they had many characteristics in common, including extreme militaristic nationalism, contempt for electoral democracy, and political and cultural liberalism, a belief in natural social hierarchy and the rule of the elites, and the desire to create a Volksgemeinschaft, I probably butchered that, in German, or a people's community in which individual interests would be subordinated to the good of the nation. At the end of World War II, the major European fascist parties were broken up, and in some countries, such as Italy and West Germany, they were officially banned. Beginning in the late 1940s, however, many fascist-oriented parties and movements were founded in Europe, as well as in Latin America and South Africa. So let me, right there. I have had people, white people, tell me that what happens in this country, the things that are happening in this country, the things the government does in this country to people who are anti-imperialist is not fascism, it is just repression. Okay. And their justification for saying that is that they've seen fascism in Europe. And that fascism is the legitimate fascism because of the jackbooted thugs that are marching through the streets, rounding people up. So these people are telling me that it's not fascism unless the government is sending out the military to round people up who oppose and repress the military. That's what white people are telling me. In Latin America, though, there were fascist movements there. There were fascist movements in South Africa. And yes, in those movements, there were elements of the military or the police rounding up dissent. I'm thinking of Chile in particular, and the tens of thousands of leftists who were massacred by Augusto Pinochet. Mm-hmm. Now, was that carried out by, thousands of brown shirted, jack-booted troops marching through the streets of Chile? No, it actually didn't happen that way. It wasn't like this big Nazi-esque spectacle. No, it was just they knew where you lived. They came and got you, or you were at a protest and the police descended upon you, much like the police descends upon us when we protest for Palestine, when we protest for Haiti, when we protest against Cop City. It looked like that. So was it not fascist that opponents of South African apartheid were rounded up by the fascist apartheid government because there was not the Nazi-esque parade of the jackbooted thugs? That's what white people have told me, because the elements of fascism in this country and in other countries, like Latin American countries, like in South Africa, like in Zimbabwe, when it was Rhodesia, you understand that those governments were not fascist because they didn't have the big fascist military parades. This is what these people are telling me. And it's funny, I think, that people accuse Black leftists of, oh, and this just actually happened in an event that I was a panel discussion that I participated in, where somebody was like, as far as Marxism is concerned, there's nothing that anybody creates that comes out of Europe that would be good for Africans. But Marx never said he created socialism. He said he observed it and he took good notes. That's what he said. He said, I just observed the phenomenon that had happened, and I applied that phenomenon and those principles to what was happening in Europe. He did not create socialism, and he never said he did. People who have never fucking read Marx say that shit. That's where that comes from. People, Black folks who are fucking lazy and do not want to read goddamn Marx keep saying that he created socialism and white people can't create anything good for Black people. Marx ain't never said he created socialism. And it doesn't matter how many times we tell folks that truth, they just keep not believing it. Why? Because they don't want to do shit. They don't want to do anything. This is why they make such a big deal about I don't want to have anything to do with Marx. Because if they give any legitimacy to anything that Marx or Lenin or Cabral or Nkrumah or any Pan-African leader has said about socialism, then they would understand that they would have to do something about their love of capitalism. And they don't. That's why they discredit Marxism as if it's this thing white people created to trip up and fool Negroes, silly Negroes. I mean, good grief. Walter Rodney wrote a whole book. Ooh, y'all need to read. Y'all need to read. Okay, so let me go back to this. Hold on. All right, so fascist movements in Latin America and South Africa. So Europe was not the only place fascism existed. Although some European neo-fascist groups attracted large followings, especially in Italy and France, none were as influential as the major fascist parties of the post-war period. So they talk about here, and there's a lot of this. They talk about national fascisms. Then they go down here. They talk about some of the people, very, very interesting stuff. Some of the organizations, some of the movements, not going to get into that. This is the interesting thing. Common characteristics of fascist movements. Very first thing. There has been considerable disagreement among historians and political scientists about the nature of fascism. If historians and political scientists can't agree on what fascism is or is not, how the fuck you gonna come on my show and tell me I don't know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the elements of fascism that absolutely exist in this country? Negroes. Anyway, some scholars, for example, regard it as a socially radical movement with ideological ties to the Jacobins of the French Revolution. No. Whereas others see it as an extreme form of conservatism inspired by a 19th century backlash against the ideals of the Enlightenment. I think that's actually more correct, but that's just my uneducated opinion as an anti-imperialist Pan-Africanist. Some find fascism deeply irrational, whereas others are impressed with the rationality with which it served the material interests of its supporters. Let's see. So they go on to say some attempt to explain fascist demonologies as the expression of irrationally misdirected anger and frustration. You know how it is. People are like, oh, the poor whites are angry because they're broke, so that's why they turn to fascism. Yeah, no, that's not really, it's way deeper than that. Whereas others emphasize the rational ways in which these demonologies were used to perpetuate professional and class advantages. That's actually a very good discussion to have about these fascist tendencies in these societies, because through that discussion, we can ask, well, who do these fascist policies benefit and who do they hurt? And then we begin to see the class character of fascism. Right? Finally, whereas some consider fascism to be motivated primarily by its aspirations, a desire for cultural regeneration and the creation of a new man, usually after a period of what they consider humiliation and degradation of their special people, right? Which is why we see this focus in this country on traditional, like in a really what do I want to call it? Surface level kind of way, not even serious, addressing any real issue in society. But this focus that some people have on traditional marriage, and these little white girls who are on Instagram and TikTok doing their little trad wife videos, that is an expression of fascism, because it is the idea that liberalism has so eroded and degraded the institution of marriage and the traditional role of the wife. It has made women more masculine and assertive and aggressive. And that has emasculated men and taken men's power, and the traditional roles are reversed. And this traditional wife movement is a rejection of what they believe is the degradation of the family, the traditional nuclear family, by liberalism and worse, leftism, Marxism, socialism, communism. That's what the traditional wife bullshit is. It is an expression of fascism. You don't have to agree with it for it to be true, because it is. These little people, these little girls, excuse me, these little girls who get on TikTok and what's the other one, Instagram, and they make videos about how, you know, as a woman you're supposed to be proud of being able to keep your house clean and keep your kids fed and stay beautiful and keep your husband happy, and there's no reason why you can't keep your home clean, and they're crazy. They're crazy, but they are doing this as their political, social rejection of what everybody else sees as progress, like as social progress toward equality of genders, right? And the elimination of these gender roles that are quote unquote traditional, that are actually exploitative of women and children in particular. No, these people like that exploitation. They think it is a good thing. And everybody who does not agree with them is their enemy. And they will eliminate those people because what they want is this traditional family. That mess is an expression, it's an aspect of fascism. It's not that is not something that exists outside of the political realities of the society we live in. That's a really quick, really simple example of this idea of cultural regeneration. They're going to bring back the traditional family. They're going to renew the role of the man and the traditional role of the woman after they've been destroyed by liberalism, Democrats and socialists and Marxists. These people don't know what the hell Marxism is. And they know damn well the Democrats are not destroying anything, because they know the Democrats are working with them. Because you notice the Democrats don't usually say anything about these kinds of things. And the crazy arguments that conservative politicians make about these kinds of things. So much for the opposition party, right? So that's an example of this kind of cultural regeneration, or the creation of the new man that fascism wants to perpetuate. That is like one of the benefits that fascists say fascism produces for people: a regeneration of our glorious society that has been ravaged by liberalism and the onslaught of the mongrel races, and the immigrants are changing the face of our nation. Do you see what I mean? All right. So fascism is also motivated by its fear of communist revolution or of left or centrist electoral victories. Mhm. One reason for these disagreements, Britannica says, is that the two historical regimes that are today regarded as mm, paradigmatically fascist, took me a minute, Mussolini's Italy and Nazi Germany were different in important aspects. In Italy, for example, anti Semitism was officially rejected before 1934, and it was not until 1938 that Mussolini enacted a series of anti Semitic measures in order to solidify his new military alliance with Hitler. Another reason is the fascists' well known opportunism, i.e., their willingness to make changes in official party positions in order to win elections or consolidate power. Finally, scholars of fascism themselves bring to their studies different political and cultural attitudes, which often have a bearing on the importance they assign to one or another aspect of fascist ideology or practice. Secular liberals, for example, have stressed fascism's religious roots. Roman Catholic and Protestant scholars have emphasized its secular origins. Social conservatives have pointed to its socialist and populist aspects, and social radicals, us communists and socialists, have noted its defense of capitalism and elitism. For these and other reasons, there is no universally accepted definition of fascism. For these and other reasons, there is no universally accepted definition of fascism. Nevertheless, it is possible to identify a number of general characteristics that fascist movements between 1922 and 1945 tended to have in common. And it is in looking at these characteristics that we can also look at the things in this society that are similar to these characteristics of fascist movements from 1922 and 1945. All right. I'm going to stop sharing really quickly and I'm going to hop over here to the comments and I'm going to read them real quick. See, I need to hide it when I'm talking, but I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to go through the comments and see what you got to say. Okay. Yes, Franny, I will give you a link to this. Absolutely. All right. So let's get into some of these aspects. The first, we already talked about it, opposition to Marxism. Fascists make no secret of their hatred of Marxists of all stripes, from totalitarian communists to democratic socialists. They don't care. They hate Marxists. They hate leftists. Yes, they do. Fascists promised to deal more firmly with Marxists than had earlier, more democratic rightist parties. Mussolini first made his reputation as a fascist by unleashing armed squads of black shirts on striking workers and peasants in 1920 and 1921. Okay, so here we have an example, and I'm going to click on the black shirts uh, thing. And the black shirts were any of the armed squads of Italian fascists under Benito Mussolini who wore black shirts as a part of their uniform. So here we have an example of Mussolini, yes, unleashing the army on the people, and beating up, assaulting, and killing striking workers and poor people in 1920, 1921. That was absolutely fascist. Britannica says this is how Mussolini made his reputation as a fascist. What happened to the labor movements in the United States after World War One, during World War Two? What happened to the Black Power movements? What happened to the anti-war movement, particularly the ones led by students on college campus? What happened with the Chicano power movement, especially in high schools and colleges across this country. What just happened last summer? Colleges and universities across this country with the student encampments in support of Palestine. Did not the US government under Biden and Harris unleash the police on people protesting this government's policies? Didn't they do it in every single one of those instances? Stop Cop City protesters down in Atlanta. How many times have you seen the police, stories of the police? How many times has Kamau Franklin come on the Remix Morning Show and talk about the brutality of not just the Atlanta PD, but the Georgia State Patrol and the feds against protesters in Atlanta? You mean to tell me that's not fascism? Why isn't it fascism? Because they don't have black shirts? Because that's what people tell me. People tell me that's not fascism. But if it was fascism when Mussolini did it, explain to me why it's not fascism when the Democrats do it. I don't see a difference. All right. That's one example. Oh, and I forgot to do the other one. I forgot to show you what the fascist or whatever it's called is. So let me do that. I'm sorry. I just realized I did not show you that wacky looking thing. So this is the thing. This is the fascists, and usually they have a fascists. Usually they have a little what do you call it, where they spell it the way it is pronounced, but they don't have that here. So I think it's right. Fascist. So this is what a fascist looks like. A fascist. It is the insignia of official authority in ancient Rome. The name derives from the plural form of the Latin fascis, or bundle. And there you can see it's a bunch of sticks wrapped with some, I guess, leather bands or whatever, with an axe sticking out of the middle of it. The fascis was carried by the lictors, or attendants, and was characterized by an axe head protruding from a bundle of elm or birch rods about 5 feet long and tied together with a red strap. It symbolized penal power. I was very curious about what the double penal power is, because I had never heard of it. I mean, outside of where my dirty mind went. And of course, that's not the kind of penal power they were talking about. What they mean by penal power here is this. Oops, where are you? Wait a minute. Let me find my thing. Hold on. There you are. I did a quick little Google search. Normally I wouldn't mess with Google, but short on time, didn't want to read a whole bunch of books and stuff. But and AI, it is what it is. But I think this is a pretty good synopsis. The AI overview about penal power from Google reads, penal power is the ability to punish criminals and define, this right here, define what constitutes an offense. That symbol, the word fascist, comes from that thing that was the representation that the government of ancient Rome had to punish criminals, but more importantly, the power they had to define what a criminal offense was, which meant they got to define who was a criminal or not. So no legal system, no due process. Do you understand what the government decides? What's a crime, what's not, who is a criminal, who is not. And if a government has that power, not a legal system, not a separate part of the government, not a separate branch of the government that is supposed to be dedicated to legislation, but the government itself, the executive power, has the authority to determine what is a crime and what is not a crime. That is fascism. Because the government can say that anybody is a criminal for any reason. Why? There's no due process. It is the government's decision and the government's decision alone. Um, yeah, let me get to that later. Let me not mess people up because yeah. So they also say that penal power can be exercised in a variety of ways, including in prisons. Obviously, penal power can be seen in how prisoners' interactions are recorded and used to make decisions about release dates. That's very, detail oriented, down the weeds, but no. Prisoners may also feel a gap between how they see themselves and how the prison system views them. This is a very nice way of saying that penal power is also the ability of the prison to treat prisoners however the fuck they want, and nobody has any say on any of it, not even the prisoners themselves. That's penal power. But penal power can also be seen in the community, Google AI says. It can exert beyond or extend beyond the prison walls through administrative policies such as supervision requirements and license conditions. Probation staff can also recall prisoners to jail if they don't meet certain conditions. This is very important, the administrative policies, because this penal power affects people in the communities through all of the myriad ways the penal system and the government at large works together to criminalize and punish the families of people who are incarcerated in many, many ways, and continues to punish formerly incarcerated people and their families when those people get out of prison. That's penal power. Google AI doesn't say this, but penal power is also expressed in the capitulation to the carceral system in policies and legislation that come from the government. Anytime a government crafts policies to give the carceral state the power that it wants, instead of protecting the people within the carceral state and being a check and balance to the carceral state, that government is operating to prop up a fascist penal system. And that government, by design, by what do you call it, by association, guilt by association, I guess, but also by design, is in that way a fascist government. Google AI also says that penal power can intersect with local and global power at, guess where, immigration detention centers. Some say that penal power is solid, meaning it's identifiable, challenging, and taxing. Others say that it's diffuse, meaning it shapes families' experiences in many ways. It is obviously both. People who do this, who make this little, some say this, others say that, that's both siding an argument. That's what both siding an argument kind of looks like. It's like, yeah, this is bad, but some people don't have a problem with it, and other people are, other people are upset, but no, there are no both sides in this. Penal power is fascism. It is. And the United States is a big old penal colony. So Google AI finally also says, and this is the most important, penal power can also be examined in the context of colonialism. Can you believe that Google AI actually conjured up the word colonialism in a correct context? That's amazing. But they did. For example, the British believed that the rule of law was central to their legitimacy in India. They used the rule of law to shape Indian behavior and regulate official conduct. So those are nice words to say that they oppressed the shit out of the Indian people because the colonial power, the British government, had absolute penal power to determine what is a crime and what is not Everything Indian people did, and I'm talking about India as in Indian people, everything Indian people did who were colonized by the British, everything they did was a crime. That is how they controlled Indian behavior. That is how colonizers control the behavior of the colonized through penal law, through military occupation that uses penal law, replaces civil law with penal law to make everything the people do a crime so that they can be controlled. That is why penal power is very important as an aspect of fascism, because unless you are talking about the ability and the propensity of a government to arbitrarily decide that something is a crime, therefore the people who engage in that behavior are criminals and they need to be punished. When we look at governments that do this, those kinds of things are always targeted toward people who are expressing an opposition to some policy of that government. Penal power is not used on people who support the government. It is always used against people who oppose the government. So we can't talk about fascism at all without talking about this thing called penal power. So that was an interesting aspect of this. All right. So opposition to Marxism, big old part of fascism, huge aspect of fascism. How many people do you know who hate Marxists, who hate leftists, hate socialism, hate communism, don't know what they are, cannot define them, cannot tell you what the socialist countries in the world are? There are some, and they're not even entirely socialist, but can't tell you why they don't like these systems, but they hate them. They are fascists in the making. They've got the fascist seed in them. So that's one aspect of fascism. I'm going to scroll down, and there's a lot of really good information in each subsection. The other aspect of fascism, opposition to parliamentary democracy. Fascist movements criticized parliamentary democracy. Why? For allowing Marxists to exist in the first place. According to Hitler, democracy undermined natural selection of ruling elites and was, quote, nothing other than the systematic cultivation of human failure. And that is really funny because I have had capitalists who are middle school fascists. Some capitalists are high school fascists. I mean, like the level they're on. A lot of the capitalists, the little petty bourgeois folks that I know who think they're capitalists, but they don't realize that they're not rich enough to be capitalists. They just want some more money. They are the middle school fascists. They don't realize that they are adhering to a fascist ideology yet. But these are the people who will tell me that socialism, like my pharmacist, one of my pharmacists actually said to me that socialism makes people lazy. And this dude is from Cameroon. Like this clearly African man who had to come to the United States to become a pharmacist so he could make some real money because there are no decent opportunities for him, according to him, in his country. And I had to ask him, why do you think that is? Why? Oh, because all of the leaders in our country, they are corrupt. Why do you think they're corrupt? Who do you think is corrupting them? Who do you think is writing that big ass check for the leaders in your country? Who you think? It's the leaders in this country. You hopped out of the frying pan right dead into the fire, and you're going to stand in here, you're going to stand in front of me and tell me that it's socialism that makes people lazy? Well, if socialism makes people lazy, and I did tell him this, if socialism makes people lazy, then capitalism makes people murderers. He was mad as hell at me, but I ain't give a fuck because I was mad at him for telling me that socialism makes people lazy. whole damn Cuba. You go over to Cuba and tell those people that socialism made them lazy. Get, so so Hitler says uh, uh, that democracy undermines natural selection of the ruling elite. Like an aspect of fascism is that the elite is a good thing. That it is natural. Human hierarchy is natural and it's a good thing. Survival of the fittest is very much a part of fascist ideology. It is very much at the foundation of this society has to exist for the best among us, and everybody else who is not the best among us, yeah, well, we'll figure out what to do with them later. And usually what fascists want to do with the folks who are not who they consider the best among us is to exploit them for their labor, for the profit of the elites, or like the Nazis did, yeah, or like the Zionists are doing right now. So this was Hitler's idea of democracy, that it was a bad idea, that hierarchy is a good thing. They have another quote here by Primo de Rivera from Spain, who said, "Our Spain will not emerge from elections, but would be saved by poets with weapons in their hands." In Japan, the Tojo dictatorship dissolved all political parties, even right-wing groups, and reduced other political freedoms. Let's see, there was something else in here. Uh, oh, this was it. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's minister of propaganda. And by the way, propaganda and the way we analyze propaganda of the empire is a direct result of this man. Propaganda that the empire uses to deceive and miseducate and lie to the people was created, or the method of propagandizing people through a complete and total control of the media and what do you want to call it? Mass marketing, I guess. I think, yeah, I think that might be Goebbels. I think may have been the a pioneer in mass marketing with leafleting and wheat pasting, propaganda posters against Jews and Roma and queer people and disabled, yes, but he started that. So he said that the people never rule themselves. And he claimed that every history making epoch ever in the world had been created by aristocrats. So, an aspect of fascism is absolutely not just a support of capitalism, but the legitimization of hierarchy and elitism. So we go down, we go down, we go down. They say that before they came to power, Hitler and Mussolini, despite their dislike of democracy, were willing to engage in electoral politics and give the appearance of submitting to democratic procedures. You can go down there. There's some more great information. Here's another aspect of fascism: opposition to political and cultural liberalism. So I gave you the example about the traditional wife movement that's going on the social media with the little white influencers being all pissed off about something that's not a problem. Because, I mean, if you want to be a traditional wife, all you have to do is go on about your damn business and wash your husband's drawers and cook his clothes and have his kids and, you know, service him 3 nights a week whenever he wants, and just go ahead and do it. And well, you don't have to shame anybody else because they don't want to, or because their husband don't need all that. But so this is another, so that's an example of this opposition to cultural liberalism, this traditional wife movement. So Britannica says, although circumstances sometimes made accommodation to political liberalism necessary, because fascists usually didn't come to power the way people think they came to power. That's the thing I didn't want to forget. It is important to understand that fascists, even the ones we traditionally think of when we think of fascism, and that's Hitler and Mussolini, they did not come to power with jackbooted thugs. Like they did, that's not how they became dictators. That is not how they came to hold the office that they eventually turned into a dictatorship. They actually were elected. And then when they got into a level of power, then they let the dogs out. But they did not seize power through the jackbooted thugs. This is what people get confused. So they clearly say here that even these fascists participated in political liberalism in order to get to a position where they could realize their full fascist dreams. Fascists condemn this doctrine for placing the rights of the individual above the needs of the Volk, encouraging divisiveness, tolerating decadent values, and limiting the power of the state. Fascists accused liberal fellow travelers of wittingly or unwittingly abetting communism. Fascists really hate communists, really, really hate any kind of collective governing of the people by the people with an equal distribution of resources so that nobody goes without and that everybody's human rights are met. Gee, I wonder why fascists hate that. Huh. Maybe it has to do with if everybody has an equal share of everything, the fucking elite has less. So, in that regard, please stop thinking that it's only conservatives, political conservatives in this country who are fascists. Political so called liberals are too, because they don't want us to have anything either. And they will do anything they can to make sure that we keep not getting anything so they can keep getting more. They are the elite and they like it that way. Democrats also believe in this idea of a natural social, if not social, they absolutely believe in a natural political hierarchy. They absolutely do. And to me, that is not less fascist than believing in a natural social hierarchy based on race or ethnicity or gender or whatever. So Britannica says that fascists accused liberal fellow travelers of wittingly or unwittingly abetting communism. In 1935, the Cross of Fire berated moderates who were democratic conservatives for indirectly aiding the communists through their taste for compromise and hesitation. Larocque urged the French people to stand up against revolution and its sordid ally moderation, warning that on the final day of reckoning, complicit moderates, guardians unfaithful to their charge, would be at the head of the list of the guilty. Dude was like, I'm purging them motherfuckers first. Fascist propagandists also attacked cultural liberalism, claiming that it encouraged moral relativism, godless material. I'm sorry, godless materialism just made me laugh. In the biggest capitalist society this world probably has ever seen. Mm. And selfish individualism. And thereby undermined traditional morality. Anti-Semitic fascists associated liberalism with Jews in particular. Indeed, one precursor of Nazism, the political theorist Theodor Fritsch, claimed that to succumb to a liberal idea was to succumb to the Jew within oneself. Fascism is, I will not say that it is illogical. It is irrational. And it is obviously hateful, but it is really irrational. Because this man is making the idea that if you have a liberal view on anything, then you've got a Jew in you. And of course, that is an awful, awful anti-Semitic smear. but that is also an aspect of fascism. But again, I have to make it clear that is not the only expression of fascism, because a fascist society does not have to have anti-Semitism within it for in order for the society to be fascist. It doesn't. So this moral relativism thing is really funny because um, morality, that there is no, look, that there is no universal, yeah, you shouldn't kill people, but if you put your hands on me, one of us is going to the cemetery. I mean, I'm not just going to arbitrarily run after people, but there is such a thing as self-defense. Yes, you should treat all people with respect, but if you come for me, oh no, people's idea of morality is based on a whole lot of things. So morality itself is almost a relative term. And I know that's a dangerous thing to say, because then there are all these other arguments about, how you treat people, how everybody wants to be treated, and blah blah blah. And those are good arguments to have, but the problem with the argument about morality within the context of fascism is that morality itself is kind of a relative concept. It all depends on literally your material conditions and your cultural realities. But in the context of fascism, the kind of morality they are talking about is a very traditional, white supremacist focused, capitalist supported idea of morality. It is a morality that validates social and political hierarchy. It's a morality that validates the exploitation of people who are considered weaker, right? It's a morality that validates the oppression of the other by the elites, because the fascist ideology is that the elite is naturally allowed to do this because they are the ones who govern everyone else, and that's how it should be. So this idea of morality in the context of fascism is, we need to understand what that means. It is a very settler colonial, white supremacist, pan-European, patriarchal, capitalist, imperialist understanding of morality. This idea of godless materialism. What the hell is going on in this country right now? What is going on in the capitalist societies all across this world? It's materialism. And what is godly materialism better? It's not. Godly materialism is actually it's an oxymoron, because God tells us in the Bible, whether people believe it or not, God tells us in the Bible, or at least Jesus says in the Bible, Jesus said these words: it is harder for no, it is easier, sorry, I always get that backward. It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter heaven. Jesus literally said, rich people ain't gonna get to heaven. he, he basically said, ain't gonna be no rich people in heaven. A camel will walk through the eye of a needle before a rich person goes to heaven. Jesus said that. It is in the book. So no, there is no such thing as godly materialism. Jesus was also the guy who goes into the temple with a whip and chases the money changers out of the temple. Who were the money changers? The capitalists, the people who were selling doves and birds and things for the people to purchase to make their sacrifices to God. For, yeah, you weren't supposed to be doing that. And then they were cheating the people on top of that, because, capitalists are exploitative liars and thieves. And that's what they were doing. They were cheating the people. They were stealing from the people. And Jesus was like, no, you're not. This is not how we doing things. So no, there is no such thing as godly materialism. So the idea that fascists hate godless materialism, as if there is a kind of materialism that's better than God, it's not. Materialism all by itself is evil, it is wrong, it is disgusting, it is destructive to humanity. Selfish individualism. There is no more of a selfishly individualist country than this bitch right here. This entire society was built on the idea of rugged individualism. The idea that the person, the individual, and what the individual wants and how the individual wants to pursue those things is fine, and it is their right, and no one should stop the individual from doing what they want to do to reach their individual goals, even if it harms other people. That's what individualism really is. You want what you want, you are going to get what you want to get, regardless of what it costs anybody else or how it affects anybody else. And your rights are paramount above everybody else's in society. So the 20,000 people who die from lack of water because you decided you wanted to make money by buying up a lake and privatizing the water supply, you do not have to be held accountable for those 20,000 people who died because you decided you wanted to get rich by privatizing a natural resource. Mm-hmm. So that is one of the weird kind of aspects of fascism, where one aspect of fascism is that it does oppose selfish individualism, but it is also the elevation of the aspirations of a particular group of people. So it's not that fascism elevates individualism. Fascism, on the other hand, or in a weird kind of way, elevates a specific individual group above everybody. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, that is the weird kind of one of those weird kind of ways that trips people up about fascism, because they see that, fascists, they can't be fascists because they want to make these laws to benefit everybody. Yeah, no. If the working class and the poor don't benefit from those laws, if the working class and the poor are actually harmed by those laws, and the people who actually benefit are the rich, I think there's an argument that can be made about that legislation might be a little fascisty, a little bit. Another aspect of fascism, totalitarian ambitions. Excuse me. Another aspect of fascism, conservative economic programs. Ain't nobody getting no money but the rich. Let's see, go down a little bit further. Do they have some more? Oh yeah, corporatism. Ooh, this is a good one. The fascist economic theory, corporatism, called for organizing each of the major sectors of industry, agriculture, the professions, and the arts into state or managed controlled trade unions and employer associations or corporations, each of which would negotiate labor contracts and working conditions and represent the general interests of their professions in a larger assembly of corporations or corporatist parliament. Corporatist institutions would replace all independent organizations of workers and employees. This is very important for us to understand, because people think that especially with the Nazi regime, people thought that the National Socialist part, the socialist part of their title, meant that they were socialist, and this is why socialists are bad. And look, they had trade unions. Or no, you have to look at the class interests and the political alignment of these organizations that were created by the fascist governments. Why were they different from the trade unions you and I know about? Because they replaced all of the people, worker focused and led trade unions. They replaced the independent organizations of workers and employers, and the corporatist parliament would replace, or at least exist alongside, and they replaced them, traditional representative and legislative bodies. So the fascist corporatist government replaced the traditional government. They got rid of them, and the fascist government, led by the corporatists, were in place. In theory, the corporatist model represented a third way between capitalism and communism, allowing for the harmonious cooperation of workers and employers for the good of the nation as a whole. In practice, fascist corporatism was used to destroy labor movements and suppress political dissent. What happened in this country between World War I and World War II with all the labor movements, particularly the Black-led labor movements that were also anti-war? Yep, the fascist assault of the US government on those labor movements. So, in 1936, for example, the economic program of the French Social Party included shorter working hours and vacations with pay for loyal workers, but not for disloyal ones. And benefits were to be assigned by employers, not the government. The Nazi Strength Through Joy program, which provided subsidies for vacations and other leisure activities for workers, operated on similar principles. And this is a part of that Nazi program that people get tripped up on. This is why people think that the Nazis were socialists, because the Nazis, did send workers on vacations, and set up resorts for them to, yeah. But that was to get buy-in from workers for all of the other evil shit that they did. As long as they could give this one group of people, and you notice it wasn't all the workers, it was the workers they considered worthy. This is where that social hierarchy comes in again. That's not something that's isolated from the entire fascist project, because you're going to do something with the people who aren't elites. What are you going to do with them? Well, you're going to need people to support you, to keep you in power, even as you're doing all this other crazy stuff. And the only way you're going to do that is to give those people something they want, so that they can feel like, well, I know they're doing some pretty awful things, but they treat us pretty good. So what did the Nazis do? They sent the white workers on vacation. They sent the European, what did they think they were? The Aryan, that's what they was. They sent the workers that they considered Aryan, the worthy ones. They were the ones they sent on vacation. The Roma, the Jews, the queers, the disabled folks, the Black folks, the socialists, the communists, all of those folks, concentration camps. None of those folks went on anybody's vacation, right? So when we look at that, how can we look at the way political parties operate in this country today with how they pit groups of people against each other? One political party will do a little more for one group of people. Another political party will do a little more for another group of people. And instead of the people saying, why can't you just pass policies that will help all of us? Why? Yes, there are some things that you need to do to address specific issues, but when are you going to deal with these issues here? And instead of confronting the politicians, we turn on the other group of people. And then while we are claiming that the other group of people are the reason that we can't get nothing, not the political elites who are actually playing us against each other for their benefit, while we're not paying attention to them, they're doing more of that. And worse. And much worse. And what do? Election time comes around. We know these people haven't done anything for us. We know these people have lied to us. What do? We keep telling people, well, you gotta, I know they're not great. I know they did this, that, and the third. But I mean, look at the other guys. They're real fascists. They're really fascists. You have to vote for these people. Another aspect of socialism, another aspect of fascism, alleged equality of social status. Yeah, we just talked about how that's not true. In the political discourse of the fascist right, economic problems related to large disparities of wealth between rich and poor were treated as problems of social status and class prejudice. Rather than attacking upper class wealth, fascists attacked upper class snobism. Rather than narrowing class differences, they taught that these differences were subjective and unimportant. National Socialism was said to occur when a Hitler Youth from a rich family and a Hitler Youth from a poor family became comrades. No wealth had to be shared. This conception of socialism was in part an outgrowth of the Nazis' attempt to transfer military values to civilian life. In war, it did not matter if the soldier next to you came from a poor or a wealthy background as long as he fought loyally for the combat unit. Mm. Mm-hmm. Another aspect of fascism is my favorite I word, imperialism. How the fuck are you going to tell me this country is not fascist when imperialist is in its middle goddamn name? United Imperialist States of America. Many fascist movements had imperialistic aims. Hitler hoped that his Drang nach Osten, drive toward the east, by conquering Eastern Europe and Russia, would not only prove the racial superiority of Aryans over Slavs, but also provide enough plunder and Lebensraum, or living space, to overcome continuing economic difficulties at home. Mussolini's imperial ambitions were directed at North Africa, and his armies invaded Ethiopia in 1935 and promptly got their asses kicked. Polish force fascists advocated retaking all the lands that had ever been ruled by Polish kings, including East Prussia. Finnish fascists wanted to create a greater Finland at the expense of Russia, and Croatian fascists advocated a greater Croatia at the expense of Serbia. Japanese fascists preached military conquest on behalf of their plan for a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. French fascists were strong defenders of the French Empire in Indochina and North Africa, and during the interwar period, they attracted considerable support among the ruling European minority in Algeria. Portuguese fascists waged colonial wars in Guinea, Angola, and Mozambique. They ought to sound familiar because the Cubans came and helped us out and helped beat their asses. Syrian, Iraqi, and Egyptian fascist movements also supported territorial expansionism. However, there were some, and I don't even understand this, peace fascisms that were not imperialistic, such as the integralist action movement in Brazil. I have to read up more about that. I'm not very familiar with that. And I have to add here, for imperialism as an aspect of fascism, this push to expand the society, to acquire land, to conquer other people, to acquire their land, that is exactly what Israel is doing right now. Right now. That is what they have been doing since before 1948. In 1899, that is what they announced they were going to do at the Third Zionist Conference. They said, we are going to colonize Palestine. They printed it, put it in the paper, published it, everybody knew. That is fascism. And because the United States government helped them establish the nation state of Israel illegally. And the United States government has continued to support them, providing them with our tax dollars and weapons. If Israel is a fascist state, What is the entity that gives them the material to help them be a fascist state? They're fascists. Why is this hard? I don't think this is difficult. I don't care how difficult people want to make it. It's not sounding difficult to me. It never has. But let's continue for a few more minutes. Another aspect of fascism, military values, and particularly favoring military values in civilian society, like they talked about in the last section. Military values like courage, unquestioning obedience to authority, discipline, and physical strength. They also adapted the outward trappings of military organizations, such as paramilitary uniforms and Roman salutes. Hitler imagined a god who presided over military conflicts and ensured the survival of the fittest. And that's why Christian evangelicals, white Christian evangelicals, fascists, absolute fascists, they got the same image of God that Hitler had. Mm-hmm. So let's see what else they got. Volksgemeinschaft, a racially unified and hierarchically organized body in which the interests of individuals would be strictly subordinate to those of the nation. Like a military battalion, the people's community would be permanently prepared for war and would accept the discipline that this required. The Italian, French, and Spanish versions of this doctrine, known as integral nationalism, were similarly illiberal, though not racist. The Japanese version, known as the family system principle, maintained that the nation is like a family. It is strong only when the people obey their leaders in the same way children obey their parents. And I can't help but look at the way Republicans and Democrats, but especially Democrats, interact with their bases. What just happened in the last election with Barack Obama and his wife, Michelle, coming out and browbeating Black folks, particularly Black men, talking to them like they're children, commanding them to vote for genocidal cop Mala. And if they didn't, they were bad people who should be ashamed of themselves. How do you not see that as an aspect of this hierarchically organized body in which this military kind of strict adherence to authority? You don't have any rights. Your thoughts don't matter. What you think about this situation, unimportant. Didn't Barack Obama and Michelle Obama get up there and talk to Black folks like we're a bunch of children? Like we're a bunch of recalcitrant, wayward children, willful children not doing what we were told? That's exactly what they did. And that's their job. And they know that's their job. And they do it willingly for the party because the needs of the party to always stay in power are more important than the needs of the people who are the base of the party. There's that. Mass mobilization is an aspect of fascism. And this is the mass, the black, the big parades, the jackbooted thugs, the thousands of jackbooted thugs marching down the streets, the black shirts, that is an aspect of fascism, but it is not an aspect of fascism everywhere that fascist movements exist. All right, so the leadership principle. This is the belief that the party and the state should have a single leader with absolute power. Hitler was the Führer and Mussolini was the Duce, both words for the leader who gave the orders that everyone else had to obey. The authority of the leader was often enhanced by his personal charisma. There's a whole lot of talk about, Trump putting himself in place to be a dictator. There is still not officially, a one-person leadership in this country. Just because something is a cult of personality, it does not mean that it is necessarily a fascist system, as long as there are checks and balances, allegedly, that still exist that could ostensibly be used to rein in the power of said individual. In these fascist societies, Hitler, Italy, those uh, uh, checks and balances didn't exist. They just didn't. In this country, they sort of do, but nobody uses them. So in that way, can it be said that a person elected to the presidency in this country can become a singular leader? I don't know. I don't know if I have an answer to that question, and I will gladly tell you. I don't know if that is possible in this country or not. I do know that whatever checks and balances exist, the Democrats pretty much go right along with the Republicans want to do. They do. We talked about this the whole election cycle and all of the policies that Harris said she would do better than Donald Trump. Not that she would do anything different from him, that she would just do it better than him. She'd be nicer about it, but she still do it. And so in that way, Harris told us that the Democratic Party is not a check, balance, or an opposition to Republican repression. So if the Democrats are not a check or a balance or an opposition to Republican repression, then they're a part of the repression too. And then in that way, I would argue that, yeah, you do have a singular leader, because who's going to oppose them? Not the Democrats. Now, the Republicans, the Republicans will always publicly oppose the Democrats. But I don't know. I think this is one of those things where, because this system in this country is set up with these alleged separate parts of the government that have checks and balances and all that kind of stuff. This is, I think, where people say this is why the US is not a fascist nation. But again, every aspect of fascism does not have to exist for the system to, in fact, be fascist. Okay, another aspect of fascism is this idea of the new man. They want to transform the ordinary man into the new man, a virile being who would put decadent, bourgeoisie, cerebral, Marxist, and feminine liberals to shame. All these little white boys sitting in their mama's basements bitching about how they can't get a date, talking about feminism destroyed everything and all of that. They're a bunch of fascists. They are a bunch of fascists. They want the fascist membership card, because they are the ones sitting there talking about how, the bourgeois and it's true, the bourgeois are shit, but for them, the bourgeois are keeping them from getting a date and from getting married, and they need to be manly men, and it's those liberal men who got in touch with their feminine side, and it's feminism that destroyed manhood. They're a bunch of fucking fascists. Y'all can call those people incels or come up with new names for them all you want to. Fascist works just fine, because that's what they are. Down. Let me see, what else do they have to say, which are ads? Oh, this is the glorification of youth. That's interesting. How in a lot of fascist movements, they use the youth and told the youth, in order to serve your country, to make your country great for your generation coming into it, you got to rat on your parents if they're opposing the government. And them kids did it too. So education is character building. There's so much. This is really good. Decadence and spirituality. There's another aspect here. I think education is character building. But character of exclusion and elitism, that's the character building they want. Decadence and spirituality. Some of the ugliest aspects of fascism, intolerance, repression, and violence, were fueled by what fascists saw as a morally justified struggle against decadence. For fascists, decadence meant a number of things: materialism, self-indulgence, hedonism, cowardice, physical and moral softness. It is also associated with rationalism, skepticism, atheism, humanitarianism, political, economic, and gender democracy. Oh my God, they just hated every fucking thing. And they felt like because they hated everything, they had a right to beat everything up, to beat everyone who believed something different from what they believed in up. So the justification of violence and intolerance and repression was they had to do something about this awful decadence that was destroying society. And what's going on right now? Not just with the Republicans under Trump. What did the Democrats do about stopping the banning of books that the Republicans in the states did? What did they do about closing libraries and public schools down in Texas? What did they do about the abortion bans? What did they do about codifying Roe versus Wade under Obama so that that never had to happen? So that Roe v. Wade would never have been over. What did they do? So when we look at least when I look at what Democrats do not do in opposition to what people pretty easily recognize as fascist ideology from the Republicans, I equate Democrats' lack of opposition with their collusion with fascism, with fascists, because that's what it is. I don't understand how people don't see that. If you see that what the Republicans are doing or want to do is fascist, and you know that the Democrats are not doing anything to oppose them, have not done anything to oppose them, and have not said they will do anything to oppose them, I don't understand how you don't think the Democrats are fascists too if they don't want to oppose fascism. I okay. So that's a bunch of that. There is so much more. Extreme nationalism is a part of it. Scapegoating, populism, revolutionary image. Oh, there's so much stuff. Anti-urbanism, all that. I'm going to drop this link to this Britannica resource for you. There you go. But there's another one I want to share with you really, really quickly because it's been 2.5 hours and I need to stop talking and eat. I wanted to share this with you because this is a newer kind of thing. This was something that was put together, and I've seen this a few times before, and people have sent this around. The 14 Characteristics of Fascism by Lawrence Britt. Lawrence Britt is a political scientist. He came up with this in the spring of 2013. He calls this the identifying characteristics of fascism. In studying fascist regimes of in Germany, Italy, Spain, Indonesia, and Chile, Britt found that they all had 14 elements in common, understanding, though, that these were not the only fascist movements that existed in the world. These are just the biggest ones, I guess. So the 14 characteristics are powerful and continuing nationalism, disdain for the recognition of human rights, identification of enemies, scapegoats as a unifying cause, supremacy of the military. I want to make sure the US military is the most deadly and lethal fighting force in the world. It wasn't a Republican who just said that. Rampant sexism, controlled mass media. I have to read this one. You can read the rest of it yourself. Controlled mass media. Sometimes the media is directly controlled by the government, but in other cases, the media is indirectly controlled by government regulation or sympathetic media spokespeople and executives. Censorship, especially in wartime, is very common. The control of the media in this country by 6 multinational corporations that are all beholden to the US government. So they all only report what the US government wants you to know is absolutely an aspect of fascism. And this consolidation of the media is the responsibility of Democratic President Bill Clinton with the 1996 Telecommunications Act. I think it was 1996. I'll look it up and make sure. I'm going to drop a link to you so you can, but somebody please look that up. I think it is the 1996 Telecommunications Act, and drop that link in the chat for people. And please read that legislation and understand what Bill Clinton did with that legislation destroyed the media in this country and turned it into the propaganda machine for the US government that it is now. So fascism with the control of the media ushered in by a Democrat in this country. Let's be clear on that. Let's see the rest. Oh, where'd my document go? Obsession with national security. Religion and government are intertwined. Corporate power is protected. Let me go back up here to religion and government are intertwined. People correctly point this as a Republican issue because they always want to put the 10 Commandments all over the place and want people to be praying in public places as if any of that helped them motherfuckers not be the monsters they are. But that's another whole conversation. But the Democrats are always up in black churches. Every election season, they always go into somebody's black church, talking about how the church folk need to vote for them. And to me, I don't think any politician should be campaigning in anybody's house of worship. That's how separate I think church and state should be in this country, in every country. If you want people to vote for you, then you can go campaign any and everywhere else but their church or their mosque or their synagogue or their ashram or wherever, or their temple or wherever. Leave people of faith alone. I think politicians should stay out of houses of worship, everybody's house of worship. People who are people of faith, they can exercise their faith in the political sphere however they choose. I think that's the way that relationship should go between church and state. People who are people of faith, they should vote and vote however they see fit. I don't think politicians should be courting people of faith as a voter block for them. But in a fascist government, in a fascist society, you got people always up in the church talking about how this church, this faith, is key to the regeneration of our great society that has been brought down so low by the degradations of the liberals and the Democrats. The Republicans will say society has been destroyed by the Democrats. And now the Democrats are saying to folks in black churches in particular that American society is being destroyed by the radical leftists, the Marxists, the woke people. The Democrats are saying that now. So another way that they are fascist, just like the easily recognizable fascism of Trump. All right, here's some more. Corporate power is protected. We know that happens in this country. Labor power is suppressed. We talked about that 2-3 times already in this show alone. Disdain for intellectuals and the arts. I mean, dang, if y'all don't like when I say a word wrong, I know you don't like it when you think people don't know as much as you do. And look at the way intellectualism, legitimate intellectual thought, not bullshit, petty bourgeois, academic masturbation. No, not that. Actual intellectualism, really thinking, reading, just reading to learn things. Obsession with crime and punishment, Democrats also. What did Joe Biden say when he argued on the floor of the House for the 94 crime bill? After this piece of legislation passes, no one will ever say that Democrats are soft on crime again. He said that in 1993. Obsession with crime and punishment. Not just Republicans, Democrats too. They're fascists too. Rampant cronyism and corruption. Come on. From the Supreme Court on down. fraudulent elections. So, mm, so listen, like I said, I don't mind being corrected when I'm wrong. And I certainly don't think I know everything. I absolutely don't. There's a whole lot I don't know. I'm smart enough to know that there's a lot I don't know. And I don't mind people disagreeing with me. I love a good struggle that is principled and sincere. But don't come in here telling me I don't know what I know just because I'm not using the words that you would use. Don't do that. Don't do that to anybody. We need to do a hell of a lot more listening. We need to do a hell of a lot more reading. And we need to do a hell of a fuck ton more serious, honest analysis about what the Democrats do and about what this entire system is. You may not want to call the United States of America a fascist nation. Just because you don't want to call it that, it does not mean that it is not that. George Jackson was right. And I don't care what you think about what I say about it. I don't care what you think about what anybody else says about it. George Jackson was right. If you don't think this country is a fascist nation, go argue with your damn mama. Don't argue with George Jackson. And don't argue with me. So, thank y'all so much. Woo! That was more than I thought, more than I had planned, but I was having a good time and I hope you did too. I am now going to go watch some football. Yes, I understand the inherent problems therein, but I got to turn my brain off and just watch some stupid shit just so I can relax because the struggle continues for sure. A luta continua tomorrow. You understand me? But we got to keep doing this, y'all. We got to keep fighting. We got to keep having these conversations. We got to keep having these frustrations. We got to keep having these sessions. We got to keep sharing this information because if we keep doing this to raise the consciousness of our people, we will get more people involved in the struggle. And if we get more people involved in the struggle, I promise you, Victoria Acerta, victory is certain. Because we got to fight. Because if we don't fight, we will die. Thanks a lot, y'all. I'll see y'all next week. Have a great weekend. Peace.